we first started working together, we were always on this path towards data-driven marketing. How do we take data and how do we take purchase intent and drive it into your marketing pipeline, the activities of your salespeople, to much more efficiently drive pipe. And I think there's sort of, over the last couple of years, we've seen a consensus grow around that, around, yes, we want to use data, but now we're getting into the point of, well, now there's data everywhere. What do we exactly mean, and what are the challenges that people are facing, and what, the question we're trying to deliver to people is, when we work with you and see the most effective organizations, what are they doing with data that is driving the most efficiency? So I'm going to play back some of the things that we see in our own marketing that drives leads and drives activity for you, and what is working that you're telling us, and so sort of relaying some of that. So I think that when we look at pipeline accountable marketing teams, right, people that is what they are tasked with, and they treat data as a strategic asset, not just something they buy, not just something that's sort of a backdrop. They think it is as something that's really important for marketing and sales, which, I mean, strategic and tactical, the words get thrown around quite a bit, but they understand how it fits into their investment profile. And when I'll run through a couple of different things. One is that they really can understand and defend the impact that data has on, and not just the quality of the data, but the timeliness of the data has on marketing and sales investments beyond what they do. They have data that is in a quality and a format that is appropriate for for multiple teams in the organization, and we'll run through that. And they also they're thoughtful about where they spend their time as marketers and to the places that have the greatest impact. And then we'll talk a little bit about how they spend their time and their budget and what we see as the shift going on there. So, if we're talking about data, we see as like two challenges. One is that it's cheaper than it ever has been, right? Data is, you are getting awash with offers. I mean, the question I'd ask you is, how many emails have you gotten this week about VMware users that you can get in emails? I mean, I get them very frequently, and I don't buy them. So, it's just available constantly. There's LinkedIn scraping. There's telemarketing that's coming out of India. I mean, it's super cheap. And the re-rise of telemarketing means that your customers are getting a lot of calls, right? And that is the flip side of data being available, is that now customers are being deluged by phone calls possibly more than they ever have been in the past, which is sort of a funny cycle that we're on right now. And they are getting emails from many more people because there's so much data available. So it's cheap and they're being deluged. So that creates a real problem for you, right? Is that how are you going to cut through that noise? Because if that cheap data is available for one person, it's available for lots and lots of people. And you have to make sure it's being productive, not just for the marketing team, but for the sales team and for the systems that you run or buy, right? And I'll run through a little bit of thoughts about that. So that's where you go. So if we were to think about how do you think about buying data and what its productivity is and what the importance of it is. And at some level, you can think about the buying data on a cost per lead or a cost per contact basis. But I think what we need to get to is the idea of like process productivity, right? And I think most of you are pretty far along on this journey, but how do we go? And so let's walk through your money, right? Let's see how it goes. So simple case of, let's buy, leads at 40 pounds versus 60 pounds, right? One at a 50% premium to the other one. Shocking, right? Who would price their stuff so high? I think I know one company that does, right? And that all of a sudden, if we're looking on a cost per lead basis, like no-brainer, right? But let's start taking a look at where this goes, right? Okay, well, I've got a 40,000 pound marketer, that is charged with nurturing and moving, MQLs forward. All right, let's put that at 10,000, pounds per month that you've got per quarter that you've got as cost. All right, well, let's just say conservatively, I've got about 10,000. I got about 10,000 pounds of Marketo license costs annually. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. I'm not on that thing. But so let's add in, 2,500 pounds of cost each quarter for that. And now we start getting to the big numbers, right? I got 3 lead development reps at 60,000 pounds. So I got now I've got 45,000 pounds of cost each quarter for my pipeline development, right? And so when we start thinking about, what is the cost of data, you got to think about, well, what's, my job is to make all of these investments, which are fairly fixed, highly productive, right? If you're running, and so you think about, am I going to put petrol in this or am I going to put mud in this machine, right? And the quality of the data that you feel is actionable and worthwhile goes right to the productivity of all of the very expensive investments on top of it. And when we talk to VPs of marketing and sales, they really say, I care about the productivity of all of my investments. I'm not so focused on the input cost, right? So does that make sense about and I think that the leading organizations that we work with have got this math down and they understand what it is. I mean, the proxy of it is kind of cost per pipeline, but it's thinking about this and talking to your bosses and sales bosses about it. So the other thing is that probably is just as important is where are you going to spend your time, right? And this is a really crucial thing because in Europe and in Asia, marketers are asked to do so many more important tasks than they are in North America. In North America, you have the real benefit of specialization. They can do, I'm the Marketo guy, I'm the sales enablement person, and they get focus. Here, you are asked to do events, and you're asked to do sales training, and you're the product expert on something, and you've also got lead gen, right? So the question that is probably as important to our customers being successful is where are they investing their time and money, and what are they cutting loose, right? And so, and where should you assign, no, that's really sales responsibility. And, to give you, let's walk through a little math on that, right? And the answer, I'll say, is that marketers that have a greater impact with good data early in the process than later. And, the math attached to that is, let's take an example of early on in the process, 5,000 good names versus 5,000, let's call them questionable names, right? And so on the questionable names, where you're not really sure exactly what they're interested in or where they came from, let's say over the course of 3 emails that you get 1% of them to engage with what you're done, right? Or a 1% engagement rate on each email, right? So they get a click-through rate or a lead acquisition on that front over 3 emails. So the impact of that is 150 leads are better qualified as a result of that activity. If you can get better data with a good marketer early on, it's really not a problem to lift the engagement rate by double, to get a 2% engagement rate on that. And the impact of that is 300 leads being better qualified. So as a result of having good data and a good marketer teamed up, you have 150 lead difference, right? Now, what we do find is that some of the marketers we work with get pulled into activities on late stage activities. They get pulled into a lot of event work. They get pulled into how am I going to qualify leads and do email later. I think we should all be looking at the math of working on that as marketers, right? Which is that you're inherently working with a smaller list of people to work with. So it's probably 50, right? It's 50 contacts or 50 accounts. Now and you can't really differentiate between good or bad there. They're all kind of qualified. They're in your pipe. They're moving on. But if you were able to double your engagement rate, which questionable if you can do that, that's you'd have to be a very, very good marketer to be doing that. The net impact is 5 leads or 5 prospects being better qualified. So we really it seems like a funny thing for us for TechTarget to be talking about, but as we look at the market, probably one of the biggest challenges we see, and you tell us, is that you don't get enough time to focus on the things that make a difference for online pipeline generation. And we see so many things dragging your time away. And so reshaping the marketing organization to focus on productive exercises that are that you can quantify for the VP of marketing, VP of sales is there. Because I was in California a couple of weeks ago talking to a few directors of marketing for global, and they said they just sort of feel that other organizations don't get to the online work as fast as they need to, and they recognize you're sort of you're tasked with so many other things. But anyway, that's sort of one of our observations as far as real marketing team productivity is being drawn into places that they can't really make as big a difference as they would. So now we start getting into the question of when it comes to data and making it strategic. Well, how are you going to invest, and how are you going to optimize your data investment decisions? And so, if I were to back up here, I think like most people would agree, our objectives are: I'm going to try and find a prospect group that's most likely to convert to pipe. And I would say there's sort of two criterion for that. One is, if we're talking about online marketing, it has to match with what content investments you have. I mean, because content is the key to the online investment or online pipeline generation. And the second is obviously they have to fit with your market strengths, right? Now, your market strengths might be company size, they might be people that are security oriented, they might be people that are productivity oriented. You have to find, a prospect group that has got some characteristics that you are most likely to be successful with, right? And then the other part of it is which data is in a format that is going to be, gives your marketers and your reps a better chance for success. And the two sort of classic choices which people are coming to us with are saying, I am really first of all focused on either a title or account data choice, right? That's what I'm looking. I'm like title and account. That's what is guiding everything I'm doing. And that's really popular. Sales likes that idea. Like, yeah, I only like talking to the CIO, or I only like talking to these accounts. So that's what a lot of people come to us with. And then the other is sort of based on activity or interest. So activity based on searches, or having visited your site, or their content activity. So I want to roll through what those choices look like when it comes from a response perspective, right? So let's imagine that this is the title or the ABM search. So if I were to talk about, this is the world of UK enterprise buyers, and you were to say, I want a certain number of accounts or titles, right? Well, I'd start to pick out accounts like this. But in many ways, this is kind of a small section of the market, and I'll contrast it in a second. And when you do this, you really don't know what their need is. You've gone them by their title and their account, but you haven't established that they actually have a pain point that is attached to your solution, right? Because if you just choose titles and accounts, they don't really have the pain point necessarily. You just know you'd like them to have it. And we all know as marketers, the challenge of marketing as someone that has your pain versus someone that you wish had that pain and you're trying to develop that pain are two very, very different tasks, right? One's a little bit easier. And so when we do our marketing if we took this pool of UK marketers and said, okay, I'm just going to go after a certain number of accounts and a title with your white papers, our acquisition rate, and not look at anything about what their activity has been, our response rates or acquisition rates for leads are 0.03 to 0.01%, right? So that's what our acquisition rate looks like when we pull out interest out of the discussion. That is a hard rate and I'm not even just talking about TechTarget. I'm talking about in your own list or in your own data choices. It's hard to make progress if you've got acquisition rates like that. And I think one of the other parts that I think is important is that while we all talk about acquisition rates, this is email is a proxy for everyone's challenges to make progress with an account. 0.03 is probably what a rep faces in trying to get into the account, because they're trying to make the same pitch, but they're trying to do it on a much smaller, lower scale than email is, right? It's a proxy for, are you hitting them with the right message? I think I was glad that we put up the sort of a real world example is, we put up about, where are you going to go to the pub for the England, Wales match? It's like, what's on the mind of people in the audience, and make sure you talk to something that's on their mind, right? If you're not talking to something on their mind, it's kind of harder to get their attention. So, and I think greater focus, like an ABM approach, it feels good, but it creates a really high hurdle for effectiveness, right? So, if you're taking an ABM approach, and I'm not arguing against it, I'm just saying this is what some of the challenges are, is that if for early stage lead gen, is that you have to come up with a very, very attractive email or approach in order for this to be successful. And you need data that actually helps you make that email or make that approach really well. It's not the contacts that are the problem, it's the data about the people to be effective. So, again, let's put the math on this, right? If I have 5,000 people and a 0.25% acquisition rate, which is a pretty, not a bad one, acquisition rate being how many of these people actually convert to a lead in a single email, right? So not just a click-through rate, but actually you're going to form fill you. If you're at 5,000 people, you get 13 leads from one email at that acquisition rate, right? But once you go to ABM and I only want these titles or I only want these accounts, naturally your numbers get quite a bit smaller, right? And so if you had a 0.25% acquisition rate, again, not bad, it takes you 8 emails or 8 phone calls to get 1 response. So all of a sudden, the productivity that you put yourself in is quite a challenge, right? And so if you're going this approach, you need to supercharge the data that you're giving to people so that you can lift that acquisition rate, right? The data that is not just about the contacts or that these people exist here. It has to be, what are their interests? What have they done in the past? Obviously there's information about what's going on in the market or what's going on in the industry, or you're writing things that are vertically oriented to that solution. But it puts a really high marketing threshold on what's going to be effective there. So as you go down that approach, it's not just about finding names with these titles and things. It's about finding data that actually helps you lift that acquisition rate, right? And again, acquisition rate is just our data-oriented way of thinking about making something that sounds really good to the prospect and they're going to respond to. And it's not just email, it's what your reps do. Does that make sense about that sort of way of thinking about the data? So, that's, if we think about that now, I think, TechTarget definitely has a way of thinking, but the way of thinking is driven off of the data and effectiveness. Because if we take a look at UK enterprise buyers and first say, well, let's look at the people that are security focused, right? They've taken an action based on security. And then the next tier is, I'm going to look at people that have just taken an activity on security, incident, and event management. That's my next proxy, right? And my next one is, I'm going to say only within the last 90 days, right? So we tend to look at, saying, okay, what have they done? And then when did they do it? And as a result of taking those 2 filters, or those 2 filters on the data, we take the acquisition rate and we improve it by 4 times, right? So, we take what was that 0.03 and that 0.01 and we make it 4 times better just by saying this is the primary cut of the data I want. Because you can act on that data, right? You can say, I know these people are SIM focused, so I'm going to put something right in front of them that's just about that, right? Or I can go to another level of detail down. Because once you know what it is, everything becomes a lot more productive. And then if you want to give that data into on accounts, then that activity that you have on account-based marketing becomes much more effective. Right? So I think I have a bit of an axe sometimes on telemarketing because it's been changing quite a bit. But if you imagine this same sort of metric that I put up here. About or not metric, but this framework of how are you finding the right people. And imagine how telemarketing works is that really the first level of proxy is who picked up the phone, right? That's the baseline for all this, is who picked up the phone. And the second is, who the caller said, wanted the white paper. And if we imagine that it takes 60 calls to get through to one live person, human interaction says that that person might get the white paper a little bit more % of the time than they really wanted it. And so I think that we have to look at that contact data without true purchasing intent can act like as a depressor to follow-on marketing, right? You've gotten data without real without the user's real purchase intent or the real interest in it. Now, I don't have, I can't look at that inside of your pipeline. You guys have to look at that, but that's my guess. And we have some data that kind of backs that up. So how do you get this data? If I've convinced you that activity and interest data is the right way to go, how do you get it? Now, I think that you can do a lot to collect this data on your own, and the effective marketers are definitely doing this, and effective marketing teams. And the first place is, Google searches, right? If you get people that are, looking for that long tail of keyword terms that are about your product, this is proven over and over again to be a great source of leads for you, and there's really, a clear vision for that. The second is your content, your site, right? If someone has come to your site, that is as good a signal as you're ever going to find. I think there's been good success with some of the gosh, I'm blanking on the term, the sort of ad targeting of people that have visited your site, the retargeting, and making sure that these people are at the center of your pipeline. I don't think it's any real surprise that that's really worthwhile. I would say that, we haven't found in our data, and I'll give you two experiences of building up very significant specialized content that is focused just on the UK. And I'll give you two examples of why we haven't seen that to be a very effective use of our content budgets, right? So one is that when you're doing it for your site, you're kind of competing with the SEO traffic that your .com site does, right? And that doesn't end up being that effective for English language traffic. And there are very little keywords that are very focused on just the UK. So that content investment really doesn't bear itself out. And then when we've looked at response rates, we've taken your white papers and written promotional copy for them with Americanisms and the very best, English that we could do, and we see zero difference in the response rates, right? So I think that as an issue on localization for the UK and European market is overdone, and again, it's an area where I think people spend too much time because it doesn't bear itself out. Now, there's a different problem if you're doing white papers that are being left behind and you want them to be local. That's like a very good reason. But if you look at it in the very narrow point of response rates, doesn't make any difference, right? So I don't think there's big investments there. If you are in charge of your European budget, there's a different thing here. Content that you spend on French, German, and Spanish in your technology area is extremely worth it. There is not nearly enough content in language for these issues. I mean, it's ridiculously low. And the evidence we have on that is that we've been on very, very big investments in the content on our French, German, and Spanish sites. And the results of our SEO, the result of our organic traffic, just as getting content onto those pages, is way outsized to any other content investments we've made, which says there's very little competition for technical content in those languages and an extreme demand for it. So you can do very well. And then the same thing is true on the content on the white paper side. When we promote a true French white paper, not just an English white paper with French copy for the promo, which is also a popular technique, response rates are gigantically better, right? So if you want to make progress in those markets, this content investment is like absolutely required. And if you guys ever needed help to make that case to the US to make budgets, we can help you with some data for that because it's a huge challenge in the market. So UK, it's not, I don't think UKification of content is a worthwhile time or money, but otherwise. So if that's true, and you look at Google is key because they have the same keywords. Your site is because it's focused on the content. We found evidence that, if we have content that is focused on your particular technology area on TechTarget, it gives you the same level of signal and can give you the same level of data quality which you need to drive into your marketing. Let me give you the data evidence for that, right? Which is that when we run banners for you, and we target those banners at TechTarget wide, right, across all of our sites, we get to about a 0.05% click-through rate. When we take them and target them to a site that is focused on your technology, well, we got almost triple the click-through rate, right? And when we take it and put it just onto your sub-technology area, which is an essential guide for us, we're at 0.22% click-through rate. All right, these click-through rates are small, but it's, again, a factor of 4 improvement based on the targeting. So the content that is exactly on your topic, the difference between content that's about technology and a content that's about exactly on your topic is 4 times different, right? So, what I would say is, don't be satisfied with something that's kind of what you're looking for. Exactly your technology subject makes a big difference. And you work in technology, you know the difference. So, focus on the things that are exactly what you want. Again, a little bit of a telemarketing thing here is that I'll say that we've surveyed people that they're more likely to give inaccurate information to a telemarketer in a BANT call or a survey call than they are, because especially in unsolicited numbers. And this is data which we collected in language across over 1,000 IT buyers in Europe and the UK and APAC. So, kind of a problem about the data you're pulling in. Renee, how am I doing on time? A couple minutes? All right. That means I'm over. It means I'm over, right? Yeah. All right. Well, I'll skip through a little bit of this stuff. All right. So something else to think about is about events, and again, I think you guys all know in your bones that we're in a transition from the importance of face-to-face events in your marketing cycle, and we all know that. But it feels like there's still a lot of time and effort being spent on events, and as we talk to you, you're trying to move it, right? Because when we look at, if you looked at our activity pattern on our sites about over the course of a year of people in your technology, what are they interested in? It looks like this, right? It doesn't disappear. It goes down in August, but it doesn't disappear, right, over the course of time. And if you're going to do an event and you're really pushing into the market and that's your primary marketing effort, that's what this looks like over the course of the year. This is the only time that you're really making investments in budget out for that. And there's a lot of things, I think, that depress the effectiveness of that, right? So the first is I'm not available at that time. All right, well, you market as someone that can't come at that moment, right? Or, the speaker's from the wrong industry, all these, it doesn't fit exactly. And my interest isn't high enough at this date for me to get out of the office. And so all of these things kind of depress the impact of marketing on that. And online sort of gets you access to this stuff all year long. So, and I think that probably I was having a conversation with someone earlier today, the trickiest stuff you have in front of you are the process issues, right? Data can make marketing automation and sales more productive only if you coordinate with all those other teams. And this is hard stuff. And talk about how you invest your time. If you spend more time on this, we know it's productive. And this has nothing to do with the media you buy or the contacts you buy. It's just about how you work in your organization. But when we see people as successful, and I think the marketing panel will probably bear this out. Last year, the marketing panel was all about people that had talked, they go and sit with sales guys, and they make sure it's actually being implemented and used, right? But the application and the use of that insight in other teams will dramatically lift engagement rates. So, and the classic example of your email that your reps send has to stand out from gigantic amounts of email coming from other people. That call that they make has to be data intensive in order to get anybody to respond. We always talked about dumping data over the wall to sales. If you dump data with no context into Eloqua, you will have the same problem, right? It will be very unsatisfactory. And so when we see customers that are doing things, and again, we don't engineer people's systems, this is just what you tell us, is that what we see the most effective people doing are marketers that sit with the sales team at least once a week and are just sitting there asking questions about the data, looking at the emails they're doing, talking about the calling. They are seeing better pipeline results. And maybe part of it is just there's better trust that's going on, but there's no doubt that that's effective. The significance of sales enablement is definitely catching on. So as I was thinking about this, I just typed in sales enablement jobs, tech companies, in LinkedIn the other day, and I found 134 jobs just at tech companies that, in the UK looking for that. Now, sometimes it's just a requirement, but there is no doubt that there's a shift of people that are sitting there with the sales team trying to make them more effective. And we were on the phone with someone the other day that I didn't think of as really a forward marketing organization, and they had hired a person just to sit with there and to make sure that the sales reps were using the insight that they had bought. So that kind of helps there. And then I'll say, I don't really know this. We don't understand enough about how you guys are using your marketing automation system sometimes, but I think that a lot of times the value in the data and the contacts you bought is kind of getting stripped out and all of it just being put in as though it were just contact data. And I think there are opportunities for us to work better on with that. So packaging that data to be effective for different sales teams, that was the activity intelligence dashboard was the first thing we really tried that, and we've been really working on that for a long time with you. So the next generation of what we're going to do is what Justin's going to come up here and talk to you about, is about Priority Engine. So I've gone over, so probably don't have any time for Q&A right now, but I'll be around, if anyone wants to do it. But anyway, thank you very much.